The letter arrived on a Thursday in late May, the kind of Virginia day when the air feels thick enough to chew. I was 61 years old, retired from teaching history at James River High for 32 years, and I was standing barefoot on the warm concrete of my driveway, holding an envelope that looked like it belonged in a museum. Heritage Point Homeowners Association was embossed so deeply I could feel the letters with my eyes closed. Inside was one sheet of heavy cream stock and a single paragraph that made my coffee turn cold in my hand. Violation notice 2025 to 0417. Fine, $100. Infraction. Installation of unapproved flora, specifically 6 specimens of Petunia X hybrida in the unapproved colorway Sunset Coral. Remediation required within 10 calendar days or additional penalties will accrue at $25 per DM. Ellen came to the door in her gardening gloves, the ones with the little roses printed on them, and read it over my shoulder. She laughed once, short and sharp, the way she laughed the day the principal told me I could no longer teach the Vietnam War from the perspective of the Vietnamese. They find us for petunias, Robert, she said. Petunias. 2 weeks earlier we had stood in the garden center at Lowe's, the one off Hull Street, pushing a wobbly cart past pallets of marigolds and impatiens. Ellen had lifted the flat of 6 pink flowers to the light. They're the exact color of the dress I wore the night you proposed on the Skyline Drive, she said. Remember? I remembered. I also remembered telling her no reasonable human being could possibly object to petunias. They were the Switzerland of landscaping. Neutral, cheerful, impossible to hate. I was wrong. That afternoon Karen Whitaker came power walking down Dogwood Lane in her uniform. White visor, navy Heritage Point polo tucked into khaki capris, Princess the terrier yapping like a broken smoke detector on a pink rhinestone leash. She stopped precisely at the invisible line where my St. Augustine met the street. Robert, she said, smiling the way a cat smiles at a canary with a broken wing, those are Sunset Coral. The architectural guidelines are very clear. Pastel blush or Liberty red only. Sunset Coral is aggressive. Aggressive, I repeated. The word hung in the humid air like a bad smell. It disrupts the visual harmony we've all agreed to maintain, she said. You have 10 days. Princess growled for emphasis. Ellen wanted to pay the 100 and move on. We're not hurting for money, she said that night while shelling peas on the back porch. Let her have her little victory. I tried. God knows I tried. But every time I walked past those 6 innocent plants, I heard Karen's voice calling my wife's favorite color aggressive, and something that had been asleep in me since the day I turned in my classroom keys woke up snarling. That night, I went to the hall closet and pulled out the binder. You know the binder. Every house in Heritage Point got one at closing. 3 inches thick, white vinyl cover, gold lettering that said covenants, conditions and restrictions like it was the word of God etched on stone tablets. Ellen saw it coming and poured herself a bourbon without ice. Robert, she warned. Just research, I said. I lasted 3 nights. The first night, I read until 2 in the morning, falling down rabbit holes about fence picket spacing and the exact Pantone shade of Heritage Beige. The second night, I started a legal pad titled Loopholes. By the third night, the kitchen table looked like a murder investigation. Highlighters, sticky notes, coffee rings, and in the center, page 312, section 7, landscaping standards. There were 2 columns. Approved flora, Indian hawthorn, knockout roses, red only, Liriope muscari, dwarf Yupon holly, and approximately 47 shades of sadness. Prohibited flora, anything with thorns, anything that smelled, anything that grew faster than Karen's disapproval. And then, in the pure, crystalline silence of 3:17 a.m., I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. Dandelions were on neither list. Taraxacum officinale, the common dandelion, scourge of golf courses and suburban dads everywhere, had been completely, gloriously, overlooked. It was the legal equivalent of finding a back door into Fort Knox left ajar, because nobody thought to lock it. I laughed so hard I woke the dog. The next morning I was on the phone before the sprinklers shut off. 5 landscapers thought I was either getting divorced or having a nervous breakdown when I asked them to remove every blade of grass and leave me with bare dirt. The 6th, Luis Morales, owner of Morales Landscaping, simply asked for an address and a deposit. By noon on Friday, my front yard was a pristine rectangle of red Virginia clay. The sod rolled up like carpet and disappeared on a flatbed truck. Karen stood at her front window, visor pushed up on her forehead, mouth open wide enough to catch flies. Ellen came home from the grocery store, took one look, and said, "You've finally done it. You've lost your mind." I kissed her on the cheek. "Honey," I said, "I have only just begun." Phase 2 required patience and the United States Postal Service. 10 pounds of dandelion seed arrived 3 days later in a plain brown box that looked like it could have contained ammunition. The return address was a feed-in seed in Ohio. The reviews on the website were poetry. My HOA president cried actual tears. 5 stars. Would make Karen rage again. Bees love it. Neighbors hate it. 10 out of 10. I waited for a Saturday when every garage door on the street stood open and the breeze came from the east. Then I filled the broadcast spreader and walked my rows like a man planting a crop of pure spite. Tom Hargrove next door paused with his edger. "What exactly is that, Robert?" "Native pollinator meadow," I called back cheerfully. "Very eco-friendly." He nodded slowly and went back to making his lawn look like a putting green. I finished the last row just as the wind shifted west, straight toward Karen's house. For 2 weeks, I became the most dedicated waterer in Chesterfield County. Every morning at 6, and every evening at sunset I was out there with the hose, giving my dirt a gentle mist. Neighbors started timing their dog walks to coincide with my watering schedule. "You're watering dirt, Robert," Tom said on day 9. "Seed needs consistent moisture," I replied with the serene confidence of a man who knows exactly how this story ends. On day 14, I woke to a miracle. I opened the front door in my robe and nearly dropped my coffee. The entire yard had transformed overnight into a sea of blazing, defiant yellow. Not patches, not clumps, a solid, undulating carpet of dandelions 3 inches high and brighter than anything God ever intended for a suburban lawn. It looked like the sun had melted and poured itself across my property. I stood on the porch and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was knotted. Karen arrived at 7:42 a.m. Princess tucked under one arm like a furry grenade. She stopped at the edge of the yellow ocean and made a noise somewhere between a scream and a tea kettle exploding. "Robert James Thompson, what in the name of all that is holy have you done?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Morning, Karen." I went with a native wildflower meadow. Very popular with the younger generation. "These are weeds." "Technically," I said, pulling a laminated copy of Section 7 from my robe pocket, "they are unregulated flora. Not approved, not prohibited. 100% compliant with the covenants as written." She stared at the page like I had handed her a death warrant for her entire worldview. "I will be speaking to the board," she hissed. "Bring donuts," I said. "It's going to be a long meeting." 3 days later the seeds went airborne. A warm front rolled through, and every dandelion in my yard decided it was time to colonize the neighborhood. Little white parachutes filled the air like the world's gentlest invasion. They drifted across Tom's fescue, settled on the miller's boxwoods, parachuted into Karen's koi pond. Tom spent an entire Saturday on his hands and knees with a shop vac. Karen stood in her driveway with a leaf blower pointed at the sky like a deranged anti-aircraft gun. Then came the police. 2 officers showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. The older one, Sergeant Miller, looked like he had drawn the short straw in the morning briefing. He took one look at my yard and sighed the sigh of a man who has seen too many neighbor disputes over flamingos. "Mr. Thompson, we have a complaint of noxious weed propagation and public nuisance." I handed him the laminated page. City code defines noxious weeds. Dandelions are not on the list. Neither, for what it's worth, are petunias and sunset coral. He read it, rubbed his temples, and handed it back. "This is above my pay grade," he said. "Just try to be reasonable." "Reasonable," I said, "is a man being fined $100 because his wife planted flowers the color of their engagement night. I'm way past reasonable." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 sharp in the clubhouse. Karen sent out flyers in Comic Sans, which should tell you everything you need to know about her mental state. Attendance mandatory was underlined 3 times. The room was packed. Every folding chair was taken. People stood along the walls. Somebody brought popcorn. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint titled Crisis of Community Standards. Slide 1 was my house from Google Earth with a red circle around the yellow rectangle. Slide 6 was a close-up of a dandelion seed on her tulip with the caption Biological Terrorism. Slide 9 featured a stock photo of a crying child, reason unknown. She moved for an emergency amendment to be known as the Dandelion Eradication Act, effective immediately, fines to begin at $500. I stood up. The room went quiet enough to hear Princess sneeze in the back row. "Karen is right about one thing," I began. "Rules matter. But rules that fine a man for planting his wife's favorite color are not rules. They are petty tyranny dressed up in polo shirts." I read from my legal pad. "Mrs. Alvarez, $200 for a basketball hoop 6 inches too high. Mr. Patel, $125 for a garden hose visible after 6 p.m. The Hargroves, $75 because their Christmas lights were warm white instead of pure white. Mrs. Chun, $50 for a welcome mat that said Live, Laugh, Love, deemed excessively cheerful." Then I read Article 11, Section 4. Emergency amendments require evidence of imminent physical danger to persons or property. "Yellow flowers," I said, "do not qualify." Tom Hargrove stood up next. His voice shook, but he stood. "My wife spent 4 hours picking dandelion seeds out of the pool filter," he said. "And last year Karen fined us because our Halloween pumpkin was too orange." I'm done. One by one people stood. The vote was 27-4. The Dandelion Eradication Act died before it was born. 3 days later a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. No embossing, no seal. Inside was a letter on HOA letterhead, signed by the treasurer, not Karen, offering to pay in full for removal of the meadow and installation of approved sod if I would kindly consider the matter closed. The original $100 fine was waived with the board's sincere apologies. Luis and his crew came back the following Monday. By Wednesday my yard was green and boring again, exactly like every other yard on the street. Peace returned to Heritage Point like a blanket settling over the neighborhood. Then one morning Ellen noticed the small garden gnome tucked between the new pastel blush petunias by the mailbox. Red hat, fishing pole, ceramic grin. She asked where it came from. "Catalog," I said. "Page 84. Not on the approved list, not on the prohibited list." She looked closer. The gnome was not holding a fish. He was holding a tiny, perfect, yellow dandelion. Karen walks past every morning at 7:15 sharp. She looks at the gnome, looks at me sitting on the porch with my coffee, gives the smallest, stiffest nod you have ever seen, and keeps walking. Princess hasn't barked at my house in weeks. Some wars are fought with lawyers and lawsuits. Some are fought with seeds and patience, and a man who finally decides he has nothing left to lose except his sense of humor. The petunias are back in sunset coral. The gnome stands guard. And every spring, if you look very closely in the cracks of the sidewalk in front of Karen's house, you might just see a brave little yellow flower that somehow survived the winter. Tell me in the comments, where would you have drawn the line? Would you have paid the $100 and pulled 6 flowers that meant something to your wife? Or would you have ordered 10 pounds of dandelion seeds and waited for the wind to do the rest? More importantly, when someone with a clipboard and a visor decides your joy doesn't match their color chart, do you smile and comply? Or do you find the one thing they forgot to ban and plan it until the whole world is a little brighter whether they like it or not? I'm 61 years old, retired, and I still have a little fight left. Drop your stories below. I read every single one.